Don't forget to like and subscribe to Jolie Knots Crochet. Share with your friends. Hit that little notification bell so you can get notified when new patterns release. All our videos are available in left and right-handed tutorials.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Jolie Knots Crochet. I'm Crystal and today we are going to be making this gorgeous puff garden shawl. Now this shawl is going to be worked from the top down. I know I do a lot of my shawls bottom up, but this one is going to be worked top down, and we will have a point at the bottom. This pattern has a 6-row repeat, and we will be ending at the bottom row with these fans. Okay, the yarn that I used today is Yarn Bee's Luxe Lollies. This is what I have left of my second skein. So I used 1.5 of these, approximately 750 yards. The size of the shawl that I made is 32 inches in length and 63 inches in width. Okay, the color is Marzipan Plan. Marzipan Plan. Okay, it is a 100% acrylic yarn, 7 ounces, 502 yards. The recommended hook size is a 6mm hook. I am going to be using a 6mm hook, and you will need 1 stitch marker just for your center point in case you need it, or if you don't need it, that's fine. And at least 700 to 800 yards of yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and use part of this and show you how to get started on your puff garden shawl. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take a slip knot. Now the slip knot is going to be used as our magic circle. So in order to do that, I make a backwards slip knot. So instead of pulling my working tail through, I'm pulling my end through. And what that's going to do is when I work into my ring, I can then pull my end to tighten it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I am going to double crochet into my ring, chain 1, double crochet into my ring again, chain 1, and then 1 last double crochet. So your beginning chain 4 is going to count as a double crochet and a chain 1. So you should have 4 double crochets separated by chain 1s. And now I'm going to pull my ring to close. Okay, just like that. Now for row 2, we are going to chain 4. Again, counts as the first double crochet and chain 1 for your V-stitch. Now we're going to double crochet into our first stitch, and that's creating our first V-stitch. Now into this next space, we're going to put 1 V-stitch. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Into the next space, we're going to put another V-stitch. Now into the last space, we're going to put 2 V-stitches. So we have 1 V-stitch here in the first stitch, 1 V-stitch in the first chain space, 1 V-stitch into the next chain space, and now into the last one, we're going to put 2 V-stitches. And that's going to be the end of your second round, your second row. Now for row 3, we're going to chain 4. Double crochet into the first stitch. That's creating our first V-stitch. And now what we're going to do is into our first chain space, we're going to make a puff V-stitch. So how we're going to do that is we're going to yarn over, go into the space, pull up a loop, yarn over, go into the space, pull up a loop. We're doing that a total of 4 times. 3, 4. Yarn over, pull through all but the last loop on your hook, and then yarn over and pull through the last 2. Chain 1, and then we're going to puff stitch again. So yarn over, go in, pull up a loop 4 times. Yarn over, pull through all but the last loop, and then yarn over and pull through the last 2. And that is what your puff V-stitch will look like. Now into our next chain space, we're going to put a V-stitch. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. In the next chain space, which will be our middle chain, well, our middle V-stitch. So we've got 1 V-stitch here worked with the puff stitch, 1 V-stitch worked into our V-stitch, and then into our next V-stitch, we're going to place up another puff V. So yarn over, pull up a loop 4 times. And there we are. Into your next space, you're going to put a V-stitch into your V-stitch. And now into our last space here, this is our last V-stitch, we're going to put 1 more puff V-stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to put a V-stitch into the same space. Double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. And that is going to be what our third row will look like. You should have a V-stitch, a puff V, a V-stitch, a puff V, a V-stitch, a puff V, and a V-stitch at the end. Moving on to row 5, we are going to chain 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Getting started on row 5, we're going to chain 6. Turn your work, and we're going to single crochet into this first chain space. Now into the puff V-stitch, we're going to place 6 double crochets. Once you have your 6 double crochets, we're going to place 1 single crochet into the next V-stitch. So single crochets into your V-stitches, And now into our middle puff stitch. This is going to be our center puff stitch. It's going to be different than these 6 flowers. So we're going to put 4 double crochets, and then a picot. Oops. Picot's chain 3 and then slip stitch to your front 2 loops, and then 4 more double crochets. Now into the next V-stitch, we're going to put a single crochet and then 6 double crochets into our puff stitch. Into your last V-stitch on the side, we'll single crochet, and then we will chain 3 and put a double crochet right into that same space. And that's going to be what your row 5 should look like. Now we're going to get started on your repeat rows. Rows 6 to 11 are your repeat rows. So the first thing we're going to do for row 6 is chain 4, turn your work, and double crochet into the first stitch. Chain 2, and into our single crochet, we're going to put a puff stitch. Yarn over, pull up a loop 4 times. Pull through all but the last loop, and then pull through the last loop. Chain 2, and in between your 3rd and your 4th single crochet, in between is where you'll put a single crochet. Chain 2, puff stitch into your single crochet, chain 1, and then puff stitch again. So this one's actually a puff V-stitch. Chain 2, and into your picot, finding the middle of your picot, we will put a single crochet. So you should have a V-stitch, chain 2, puff stitch, chain 2, single crochet, chain 2, puff a V-stitch, chain 2, single crochet. Now we're going to work the same thing back down the other side. We are going to chain 2, puff V-stitch into our first single crochet, chain 2, finding where our 3rd and our 4th double crochets are, and single crocheting in between those. Chain 2, puff stitch in our last single crochet, chain 2, and then we're going to V-stitch in the last space, this little loop here. And that is what your row 6 will look like. Now moving on to row 7. we're going to chain 3, turn your work, and we're going to place 2 double crochets into this first stitch. So our chain 3 counts as a double crochet, and then you have 2 more, so you should have 3. Now we'll put 1 more double crochet into your V-stitch, double crochet on top of your double crochet, 2 double crochets into your chain 2 space, 1 double crochet on top of your puff stitch, 2 double crochets into your chain 2 space, 1 double crochet on top of your single crochet. So every stitch and chain space is getting a double crochet. And when you get to your V stitches, you'll have 1 for the puff stitch, and even though there was just a chain 1 in between your 2 puff stitches, we're going to add 2 double crochets into there. Double crochet on top of the puff stitch, and the last of the side is 2 double crochets into your chain 2 space. Now into the single crochet up here on the top, we are going to put 3 double crochets, a chain 1, and then 3 more double crochets all into the single crochet. And then working down the side this way, we are putting 2 double crochets in our chain 2 space, double crochet on top of the puff, 2 double crochets into the puff V, double crochet all the way down in every stitch, and 2 double crochets into your chain 2 spaces. Now that we're at our last V-stitch, we're going to put 1 double crochet on top of the double crochet, and then we're going to put 4 double crochets into the last space. This is what your row 7 should look like. It is a solid double crochet row. Okay, getting started on row 8, we are going to chain 4, turn your work, and now we're going to double crochet into the first stitch, creating a V-stitch. We will skip 1 stitch, and into the next stitch we're going to make a puff V. So yarning over, going into the stitch and pulling up a loop 4 times. Yarning over, pulling all but the last loop, and then yarning over, pulling through the last 2. Chain 1, yarn over, go back into the loop, and pull up 4 times. Through all but the last, and then the last 2. Skipping 2 stitches, V-stitch into the next stitch. skipping 2 stitches, puff V into the next stitch, skipping 2 stitches, V-stitch. And that's what you're going to repeat all the way up. After you finish your last puff V-stitch of the side, you should have 1 stitch left before your corner. And we'll put a V-stitch into the corner space. And then we will skip 1 stitch and put a puff V into the next stitch. And then you'll skip 2 V-stitches. Skipping 2 double crochets, we will puff stitch into the next. And repeating that down, your puff V's and your V-stitches alternating. After your last puff V of the row, you should have 2 stitches left. So we're going to skip the next stitch, and into the last stitch, we're going to put our final V-stitch. And that's going to be the end of your 8th row. Getting started on row 9, we're going to chain 4, turn our work, and double crochet into the first space. The first stitch, creating a V-stitch. Now into the first chain space here, we're going to put our first puff stitch, our first puff V-stitch. Into your puff V-stitch, we're going to put a V-stitch. So now we're going to be alternating puff V's into your V-stitches and V-stitches into your puff V's. And so that's what you're going to repeat. Into your puff V's, put a V-stitch. Into your V-stitches, put a puff. You're going to do that all the way up, not increasing or not decreasing at the corner. So this will have a V-stitch, puff a V-stitch, V-stitch, all the way down. And now we'll meet you back here at the end. Okay, here I am at the end. I'm putting my last puff V-stitch into my last chain space. And that's going to be a puff V and a V. So there is my puff V. And my V-stitch. Okay. Well, this is what the end of your 9th row should look like. Getting started on your 10th row, we are going to chain 4. Turn your work, double crochet into the first stitch. Puff V-stitch into your first chain space. And this one is essentially the same as the beginning of our puff V's and V row. We are going to puff V in all of our V stitches, and then V stitch in all of our puff stitches. And you're going to do that until you get to the top of your puff V, the center puff V. And we're going to put 2 V stitches there. So let me work my way up and I'll meet you back over here. Okay, here we are at the top center or corner puff stitch. We've just completed our puff stitch before that. And now what we're going to do is just place 2 V stitches separated by a chain 1. So double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Now we're going to continue down the other side with our puff V stitches into our V stitches and our V stitches into our puff V's. Go ahead and do that and I'll meet you back down at the end. Here I am at the last stitch of my row, and I am going to end with a puff V stitch and a V stitch all into the same space. And that's going to complete your row 10. Okay? Now we've got one more row left of our repeat. Our repeat is the ending on row 11, so remember rows 6 to 11, and 11 will be our flower row. So we will chain 6, turn your work, and single crochet into the first V stitch, and then 6 double crochets into your puff V. And that's what you're going to repeat. Single crochet into the V stitch, 6 double crochets into your puff V. Work that out until you get to the point of your project, the center, and I will meet you back here, and we are going to be working our center flower just a tad differently. Okay, here we are at our top. This is the top center or the bottom center, whatever it is you want to call it. We have our 6 double crochets, and then into our next V stitch we're going to put a single crochet. Now into the center space between our V stitches we're going to do our 4 double crochet flowers. So 4 double crochets on one side, and then a picot, 1, 2, 3, slip stitch to the front 2 loops, and then 4 more double crochets. Single crochet into the next V stitch, and 6 double crochets into the next puff V stitch. Okay, so once you finish your last 6 double crochets into your last puff V, you'll single crochet at the end, chain 3, and then double crochet into that same space. And that is going to complete your 11th row of repeats. So this is what your work should look like after you've finished your first 6 rows of repeat. So the beginning here, your repeat starts from these first puffs, separating your flowers and then working down. Now for this one here, I did a total of 5 full repeats to get to my 32-inch length. Thank you everybody for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial on this puff garden shawl. If you are not a member of the Jolie Knots Crochet community on Facebook, join us there and show us what you've created.